Welcome to ChessStrategiesBlog.com. This video is part 2 of my series on how to read and record a chess game using algebraic notation. Today we'll cover how to record captures, castling, check, and checkmate. One thing I should mention before we get started is that today's videos do not have the numbers and letters along the sides of the board. You should get used to recording the moves without having to rely on that crutch. You might not always have it. Let's get started. So let's take this position for example. If the king captures an enemy piece on f1, in this case, there's a bishop on f1. If the king captures the bishop on f1, the move is written k x f1. You will find some players and some older books, or books from Europe, that use a colon to designate a capture. So the king capture given above would be written king colon f1. It is common for pawn captures to name the file that the pawn is capturing from and the square that the pawn is capturing to. So in this position, it's white's move. It would be the second move of the game. And white can capture the black pawn on d5 using this pawn on e4. The way that that move would be written is to name the file, the E file that the pawn stands on, and the square that the pawn is capturing to. So this move would be written EXD5. Now there are some abbreviated notations that would simply name the files. So this capture could be written in an abbreviated form ED. So the normal method for noting a move is to use the uppercase letter that represents the piece. If the white king were to move, we would represent that with the uppercase at K. If the rook at E1 were to move, we would use an uppercase R. If it's a capture, we use an X. And whether it's a capture or a regular move, we name the destination square. So for example, if this rook were to move to e5, we would write capital R e5. However, in this case, if we write capital R e5, there are two rooks that can go to that square, and that notation would not tell us which rook is moving. So what we need to do in order to remove the ambiguity in this case is to add the file that the rook is moving from and the square it's moving to. So if we were to move this rook to e5, the move would be RE e5. If we're going to move this rook on the A file to e5, we would write RA e5. Let's say that the black player wants to move one of these rooks to f7. Again, just writing RF7 would be ambiguous. We have to describe which rook is going to f7, and in this case, both rooks are on the f file, so RF f7 doesn't remove the ambiguity. In this case, we name the rank that the rook is moving from. So if this rook at f8 were to move to f7, we write R8 f7, and if this rook at f2 were to move to f7, we write R2 f7. Here's an interesting position that might involve an ambiguity involving the en passant pawn capture. Let's imagine that black moves his pawn from d7 to d5. That would be written in algebraic notation d5. White has two captures that he can make here. Both E pawns can capture the D pawn. This pawn at E5 can capture the D pawn en passant by moving to D6. This pawn at E4 can capture the pawn also by moving to D5. If white captures en passant, this pawn will go from E5 to D6 and capture the pawn, and that would be written EXD6. And if this pawn at e4 captures the pawn at d5, the move would be written exd5. You can see that the ambiguity is removed by the designation of where the capturing pawn ends. The en passant capture ends with a pawn on d6, and the regular capture ends with a pawn on d5. Of course, all ambiguity can be removed by naming both the original square and the square of destination. It is customary to indicate when a move gives check in your notation. So for example, in this position, if white moves rook to g5, the rook gives check to the king, and we would record the move as rg5 with a plus sign. The plus sign indicates that the rook is giving check to the black king. Here we have a position where it's white's move, and he could castle to either side. If he decides to castle to the king's side, we record that move as 0-0, and that indicates castling to the king's side or castling short. On the other hand, white may wish to castle to the queen's side, or castle long. And the notation to record that move is 0-0-0. And finally, that brings us to the notation for checkmate. In this position, it's white's move, and he can move queen x g5, giving check to the king, which has no way to move out of check. The square at h8 is covered by the bishop, and there's no piece that can interpose between the queen and the king, and the queen cannot be captured, so it's checkmate. And the way you indicate checkmate is by putting a number sign or pound sign or hash sign, whatever you want to call it, after the move. So this move would be noted as queen x g5 with a pound sign after it. And that means queen x g5 checkmate. And that completes our review of chess notation. Part 3 is going to be a review of an entire chess game, and we'll take a look at the notation again in that context. Be sure to visit my blog, chessstrategiesblog.com, and come back to see more great videos. See you again soon.